Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stack, here for KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon in Barcelona. And today we're going to be talking a lot about the whole cloud-native architectures that we're starting to see emerge, and in particular, the whole emergence of functions and how functions have become such a popular and buzzy term, so to speak. So joining me are Maddie Patrichi, Senior Software Developer at Oracle. Hi, Maddie.
Hi.
And Gregg Altschul, Co-founder and CTO of Automate Network. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
So I'd like to first just talk about the landscape out there, and perhaps you guys could talk about what your roles are inside your companies. So Maddie, you were saying to me before that you're working with Oracle on the API gateway. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think every cloud provider out there, every serious cloud provider out there provides an API gateway solution just to allow customers to take away the worry of doing things like rate limiting or tiering for their application. So we're trying to do this in a more standardized way and make it more easier for customers to use OCI services like FN or object storage or any other service that we provide.
Okay. So FN, and so that leads to my question for you, and Automate. And Automate is a company that you started, Gregg, correct?
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So Automate is a decentralized function as a service platform where developers can deploy their functions. And when they're run, since it's decentralized, we go find a node wherever it is, and it runs there and returns a result. And you pay just for compute time and a small royalty if the developer wants to earn money on the functions that they run. And all the functions are open, so by default. So you can, once you deploy, it gets an endpoint, and you can just call it. Anyone can call it. It can be shared, pulled into new applications, and such.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the serverless architectures that you are starting to see emerge, and why you chose FN. I know that you have a peer-to-peer network that you've developed, and you built FN on top of that. What were some of the reasons for that?
Yeah, so what we did was we took FN and we took another technology called libp2p, which is a popular peer-to-peer library, and we sort of wrapped FN in that. So that's kind of our communication protocol, whereas FN is the functions as a service technology. The reason we did a lot of research on the different technologies that are out there. We could have built something like this on Lambda, but then we would have been at AWS Lambda. We would have been tied into that ecosystem, or we could have chosen any other kind of technology that is provided by a cloud like Google or whatever. But then you're still stuck into those kind of technologies. And there are other technologies like FN out there that kind of allow you to kind of build. If you have your own data center, you can kind of pull that stuff in and build, like let's say, if you have an enterprise data center, you can build functions as a service for your own organization. But FN really gave us the flexibility that we were looking for to kind of make that wrap nicely with libp2p, so that we can kind of run these nodes wherever they might be. It could be in AWS or Oracle's cloud, or it can be in someone's basement if they want to. So it kind of allows for that flexibility, whereas the other technologies that we looked at didn't really provide as much flexibility as we needed.
There are platforms out there such as OpenFast, for example, that offers that capability to work across different cloud services. And we're starting to see more the usage of containers with different serverless environments than to be able to make that portable. Mm-hmm. There's also the promise of Kubernetes, right, and Knative. So I'm curious on what are, maybe you both can comment about what are some of the advantages and disadvantages that you're starting to see in the market, and why'd you decide to go this way instead of like Kubernetes Knative, which seems to be growing in popularity?
Sure. So we could have used Kubernetes, but it didn't really play too nicely with, let's say, deploying in on compute resources that aren't really known. Like if someone just wants to spin up a node and connect to our network, Kubernetes wasn't really the right technology for that. So we don't actually use Kubernetes. We use our the libp2p layer for discovering where nodes are, and then when someone calls a function, we find a node that has available compute resources wherever it may be, and then FN gets that request ultimately, and a Docker image is pulled in by FN and run there. Does that make sense?
I think so. It's what you're saying is like that P2P layer serves almost as that orchestrator.
Correct. Yeah. So the orchestration is sort of our business logic that we wrote in the wrapping of libp2p and FN. So we took those two, we kind of married them with our needs, wrapped around that to kind of do the actual orchestration in a we're sort of a blockchain adjacent company, so we use public and private key cryptography to kind of secure all this stuff, and it just it's out of the box with libp2p, that stuff. So it didn't really lend itself to using Kubernetes. We could use Kubernetes to deploy our technology. Let's say if Automate wants to run nodes in, let's say, AWS or Oracle, we can use Kubernetes there to manage our own cluster of Automate nodes. But the Automate network, it doesn't really kind of lend itself to the bigger peer-to-peer picture.
Maddie, when you're developing API gateway, and beforehand you were talking about functions, and what is your team's philosophy about functions and how they fit with API gateway?
In terms of building function as a service, we're actually looking at using Kubernetes and actually using the Oracle Kubernetes engine to try to build our own infrastructure. So build either the control plane or the data plane using Kubernetes. We've had a couple of POCs on that, and it actually lends itself very well to this functions infrastructure. With API Gateway, we're still exploring, but with API Gateway, we started with Kubernetes, and now we started because we wanted something more simple. We built our own Java services for that, but for FN, I think actually Kubernetes provides a very, very good infrastructure orchestrator to manage our services.
So just tell me about that distinction again. So for API Gateway, you're not using Kubernetes, did you say? Can you explain that to me again?
We're not. We're still exploring because we're still in like POC phase. We tried using Kubernetes. We've stepped away from it just because of the mostly because of the security concerns that we had. With API Gateway, we have a control plane and a data plane, and the data plane is accessible to the customers. So if we have a breach from the control plane to the data plane, then from the data plane, you basically have access to all of the customer tenancies. Yeah. So you don't really want to have that. Kubernetes, it is very secure. The community is doing a very great job of identifying security issues and having patches for those security issues. But given that the way Kubernetes works, that the Kube API and the kubelet, the way they communicate, it might not always be secure. In our specific case for API Gateway, this type of communication, back and forth, was not the best. It didn't lend itself in the best way. For functions, I'm not working on the functions team, but I do know that they're working with the Oracle Kubernetes engine to create their node pools and manage their services. They're looking at that to see whether this would be a good design approach.
It's an interesting topic to think, when you're starting to research how you have to think of your security posture in cloud native environments. And yesterday there was a discussion about zero trust and how the zero trust model is changing now with cloud native architectures due to the different types of capabilities for an attacker to do, for instance, a remote execution attack, through a plugin, for instance, so because they could then have that lateral
yeah.
movement, across the environment. Is that part of the kind of the posture you're trying to adopt? Is trying to, thinking about these cloud native architectures and how you have to think about them differently from that security perspective?
Yeah, definitely. We're, as I said, we're trying to make sure that we're limiting the communication and the vulnerabilities as much as possible. I'm not sure whether like Kubernetes is more like a Swiss knife. So I think it lends itself better for applications, for services, not necessarily for a provider. We are a provider of a service. We want to build the architecture. We want to be in charge of the architecture. Right. So this is why we kind of have a little bit of trust issues. We are handling very sensitive information. We have huge customers. We have governments as customers as well. So we are very, very security aware.
So tell us about your security posture then, and what you're trying to achieve by using FN and this peer-to-peer network underneath it.
Sure. So you mentioned zero trust, and we're working towards a trustless protocol where since we're peer-to-peer.
What's a trustless protocol?
A trustless protocol means I don't have to trust that. Basically, when I'm connected to one node, everything is secure from my node to your node. So there's no adjacent anything. It's literally one computer to another. Once someone wants to run a function, we find them an execution node that has compute resources, and then there's just a direct communication between those two nodes, and nothing leaves those two nodes. So everything is secure from the moment it leaves my machine to yours. If, let's say, I'm running a function on your node. Public and private key cryptography. Once it gets there, we're aiming towards a completely secure container environment, which is what we're currently looking at is a Docker image within a blanking on the name. It's an IBM technology, another container.
Is it Container D? Or?
Not Container D. It'll come to me. I'll get back to it. Basically, it's a secure container where you need keys to actually access the container, and it's all locked in hardware so that whoever's running that node can actually attack what's inside of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting. And so what is it that, what is it you're trying to achieve by taking that approach as opposed, to more, I don't know. Is it a new set of, what are some of the new set of factors that you need to consider when taking that approach?
Right. So the reason why we're taking that approach is because we can achieve really cheap compute. So if someone is incentivized to run nodes through a cryptocurrency, they can earn that cryptocurrency for running a node in exchange for running functions on that node. So basically they're selling their compute. So you have people who have data centers in their house. They live somewhere where energy is really cheap, and they can run nodes. They can run our node. They can run other nodes like Ethereum or whatever it is side by side, but they're basically running a data center, and they're selling their compute. And you can achieve much cheaper compute than if you, let's say, run in AWS. So we're looking at a blend of things depending on what our customers need. So if they care a little bit less about where their functions are running, they can choose nodes that are maybe less secure, and that's up to them. If they want to trust us as Automate, we'll be running nodes, and we can assure them that they're running in AWS and everything's secure, because we will be the provider of that secure environment.
How are you, Maddie? How are you seeing functions as a differentiator for an API gateway, for example?
In what sense? Could you clarify?
Well, API gateways are well known. I mean, as we were saying before, Amazon has an API gateway, and so Oracle's developing its own API gateway, And I'm curious about the role of, functions as a service within API gateways, and what does that provide you? What does it provide you as a differentiator? How does that make it unique?
Well, I think because we are trying to compete with all the other cloud providers, it's something that we have to have had, API gateway as a service, and the fact that we wanted to promote both functions and API gateway because they're so simple to use. And I think at the end of the day, when we talk about serverless, we want to talk about simplicity for customers, right? We want customers not to care about what's happening in the background, not to care about how to configure an API and how to write an API gateway, just how to configure it at a very, very high level. And with functions, it's kind of the same principle, right? You don't want to know what's happening in the background, what's happening with the actual infrastructure. You just want things to happen without you having to have all that knowledge. That there's a lot of knowledge that you have to have in order to build that infrastructure and maintain it.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of your own, going back to your own security posture, kind of in that respect, what are some of the features that you're building into that API gateway to me? Because even with functions and API gateways, that attack surface is extremely kind of wide. What are you doing to kind of make sure that that API gateway is secure?
Well, we have, in terms of architecture, we have a control plane and a data plane.
Yes, okay.
And in the data plane, this is where we actually run the container, the gateway containers. And the gateway container, we try to make the gateway containers as tight and secure as possible. We are actually, our container images have very, very limited libraries available over there. We have SE Linux enabled. And we are going above and beyond with SE Linux to enable all of the features that would make it as secure as possible.
SE Linux isn't easy, is it?
No, it's not. That's the thing. And that was another reason why, Kubernetes does support SE Linux now. I think it only recently, but it doesn't really have everything that we need. There's a lot more to SE Linux that, that is available out of the box, I guess.
Right. Like what?
Usually, I know that for specifically with Kubernetes, it would have been difficult to tag specific pods. For this, I wasn't involved in this, so I don't know specifically all the technical details about this.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. No, I think it's really interesting. I think it's kind of a space that we're still trying to understand. I mean, and it makes me think about the overall software supply chain out there too. And there was that, there was well publicized Docker, hack that happened a few weeks ago. And I guess I'm curious about, not necessarily that, but maybe, Gregg, how do you then kind of develop your posture, understanding there is this, software supply chain out there, mm-hmm. and, containers can be shared so easily, and they're so portable, and that's their value, but it's also their risk. And so I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. We are a completely open platform. So our Docker images we want that portability. Everything's open. It's open. We are very much on the side of open source. Everything, our whole platform is open source. We expect that people who write functions on our platform write functions that are open source, and that their Docker images are open and portable. Our compute resource can be moved around. It's out there, like anyone can run an Automate cluster within their own cloud and pull in these Docker images and completely not connect to the wider Automate network. They can do that, and we want people to be able to do that. We think that sharing resources like that and sharing functions and ideas, not just as static code, but as running services, is going to be the future, and we want to try and help make that possible. That said, people can do things that are not the greatest ideas, like log keys, right? let's say a function developer has their own database, and this function needs to read from that database, and that database that connection happens over the internet. We don't want people storing their keys to the database in the Docker image.
Right.
But that's not really the system's responsibility. That's the developer's responsibility. They have to understand the risks of developing in an open platform. If you commit code to an open source repo, you also similarly don't share your keys and things like that. So as long as you're developing smartly on our platform, hopefully the attack surface is from the system is non-existent, because again, we're trustless, and hopefully people are developing smartly so that they're not exposing things.
Well, how do you view that shared responsibility then at Oracle? There's that's become a term we've heard more of, like the shared responsibility. It's not all the cloud services responsibility, nor is it all the developer or the customer's responsibility.
In terms of functions, again, I think we have kind of like the same approach.
The control plane, the data plane.
Yeah. So in terms of architecture, we do try to make it as secure as possible. But when it comes to the containers, we are trying to it is a little bit of that's what I'm saying. It is a little bit of the customer's responsibility to be at least a little bit security aware. We are trying to do everything possible in terms of architecture to make sure that even if you break out of a container, you cannot attack any other customers. So we do try to make that, to ensure that happens. But the customer is in charge of his own container. So there's only so much you can do.
Education. You need to educate the user and the developers.
Right.
I think it's a fine balance. It's a fine line to keep in balance, because, as I said, serverless is about simplicity. It's about abstracting away as many concepts as possible from the customer. They're not supposed to know what's happening in the background, but they do have to have some basic concepts about.
I'm hearing more about this concept of minimalism almost kind of in these environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to bloat your container, right? For example, there's things you can do such as, hackers like to find containers that have package managers in them, for example. And, I was talking with a technologist from Google yesterday, and she was saying that they're encouraging people not to use package managers in their containers. Mm-hmm. So there's it is a constant education, isn't it? Yeah.
And to this point, actually, what we use for to create our containers for both functions and FN, we are using an outsourced tool called Smith, which is basically taking away all of the libraries that you don't need, and it's only exposing the ones that you do need. So you have a very tight list of libraries that you're going to use. So our container images are tiny, and you know exactly what's in them. We know exactly what's in them for our services.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's an interesting concept. I think we'll be exploring more, and also more we're starting to see more a stronger security posture in open source projects overall. Open source projects are starting to we're just starting to see it, starting to adopt, actually bring more people who have security backgrounds into the projects themselves. And I imagine that's kind of a posture that you guys are thinking about quite a bit, especially if you're on a, kind of on a peer-to-peer network,
right?
For example.
Yeah, I mean, just to dive a little bit more into the trustless concept, the concept is you don't have to trust us. Like if we're a cloud provider, we're saying to the customer, you can trust that our cloud is secure because we say it's secure. We've done these things that make it secure. The trustless component, which is very prevalent in blockchain, is trusted technology. It's all open source. You can read it. It's public-private key technology. You can see for yourself that your data is being passed in a secure way. So we're going to keep kind of beating down that path to make sure that not only are we saying that it's secure because we say it's secure, but you can look at the technology, at the software, at the code, and determine for yourself whether it's secure enough for your application.
So it's spring of 2019. 2020 will be here. Probably feel like it's going to be here tomorrow, right? So, what are some of the top priorities, for example, that Maddie, that your team is looking at over the next 6 months when you're thinking about, the API gateway and the integration of functions into it?
I think for us, and my personal opinion is that if we want to make serverless successful and mature, we want to convince bigger customers to try to use serverless in their own infrastructure. We've seen a lot of startups using functions and API gateways and things like that. It's very easy to, everyone does the demo when they upload an image to the cloud. Some data processing is happening, and this is my app. What we're trying to, I think, and this is going to mature the technology a lot more, is what we're trying to do is to integrate as much as possible with OCI services, such that you can use things like auditing and logging and metering to have something like a self-healing infrastructure, for example,
Yes.
on OCI. So you don't have to have a system admin to take care of your infrastructure. You can have a look at you can have triggers to see, if my instance is at 80% of CPU utilization, spin up a new one with functions. By integrating this with functions, you can do that. And showcasing more of these use cases is going to take the industry a little bit further, and is going to make this technology kind of really stick.
How about you, Gregg?
So for us, we're very early. We're a startup.
Yeah, I went to the site and I put my email in, so I'm waiting for the launch.
Yeah, it's pretty bare bones right now.
Yeah.
So our goal right now is to make sure that we have a delightful developer experience for our serverless technology. Our install is under 10 minutes. You can get a function running in less than 30. So we want to keep
Less than 30
minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we want to make sure that every single piece of our technology is delightful to use as that. So we need to add logging. We need to integrate with various data sources, local test frameworks that allow you to test your functions before you deploy, and then also building up the set of functions. Since we're an open platform, we want as many kind of useful functions out there as possible. So getting these GitHub repos that are kind of popular, instead of pulling it into your own code base and deploying it into your own cloud, why don't you run it on Automate? So getting some of these, the stockpile of functions built within different market verticals. That's what we're focused on.
So what about KubeCon? What are some of your interests here? What are some of the sessions you want to go to? What are some of the conversations you've had already that are making you curious and wanting to learn more about something? Maddie?
Well, I have a couple of talks. I have a couple of lightning talks to do, and I'm at the Oracle booth, so I'm gonna try to have as much time as possible to explore the actual conference. I think I really want to learn more about Istio and the newer components. As I said, we are trying to bring as many of the Cube principles into our own infrastructure, because I think that they are they are really mature, and it's good to bring that back into your architecture and try to see if that works, if that actually makes a better product, if that improves availability, if it improves security or things like that. So yeah, I'm trying to look from that perspective, what can I steal to bring into my own architecture.
Yeah, for me, I'm just I'm doing a few lightning talks at the Oracle booth as well. I'm really interested to kind of see what the landscape is, see what kind of new things are popping up, to see what we can kind of pull into our technology. I'm also looking to socialize, automate, and see what people think. Just get the idea in front of people who would actually be our customer.
When's the API gateway going to be available?
We don't know for sure. I don't know. I'm just a senior software developer, so I.
Yeah. All right.
It's sometime maybe this year, next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for taking the time
Of course.
to talk today. Really enjoyed the conversation. The security story is, I think, of real interest, and so keep us posted on your developments, and we look forward to talking soon. Thanks, Maddie. Thanks, Gregg.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.